Welcome back, everyone, to Who Moved My Career podcast. This podcast is full of career shifts. We have amazing professionals and guests here. And I'm Arun Changamito. And along with me, I have my co-host.
Nicole McNamara. Good to see you again, Arun.
Likewise, Nicole. Great to see you and great to be here today with our amazing guest, Bill Fitzgerald. Bill is the founder and managing partner at Fitztrade Search, a top-tier executive firm that has helped countless leaders and executives with their next opportunity. Bill's also an incredible author. I've read two of his amazing books. One is really provocative. It says Searching for Jobs Sucks.
We
Full
relate
of
with
tips.
that. Yeah.
Full of tips. And then the other one is equally provocative as and also inspiring, which is How to Find a Job Without Looking. And these are two really incredible books. They are all both there on Amazon, and the reviews are just fabulous on these books. So we thought it would be great to ask Bill and request him to come to our podcast and talk to our listeners. So Bill, thank you.
You're welcome.
We're grateful for your time. And I want to pass the mic on to Nicole, who actually is going to be on the podcast driver's seat today. And so I get to ask some cool questions. Over to you, Nicole.
All right. Well, Bill, we're so excited to have you here. And I got to tell the audience how we met. I think I've said before, I live in Washington, D.C., and I got an alert from local news saying executive recruiter offering free services to help folks in the federal government who have been recently laid off. Now, this is from the new notification that I generally ignore because it's usually about rodents and pest droppings in restaurants. And so, it's not something that always catches my eye. And I clicked immediately on it and I read about Bill. And you are also from our neighborhood, just up 66 a little bit. And I just said, I have to know this person, because one of the things that we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast was, when Arun and I started this, we were thinking, boohoo, tech executives, how hard that is. And, the value exchange that we make as a tech exec, we know it's higher risk, higher reward, but then to have it happen with a swath of the population who most likely hasn't really been through this before really shifted the narrative and opened up our aperture for how we might be able to help. So first of all, thank you for taking a stranger's email. You got right back to me and said, this sounds cool. How can I be a part of it? But I would love to hear, because most of the people who have listened to the podcast so far are kind of tech execs and a couple of friends in the Fed. But I would love to hear from you a little bit about why now? Why did you raise your hand? How are you thinking and feeling about these massive layoffs that are happening in our government?
Yeah. Well, thank you for inviting me to appear on the podcast. And yeah, I'm real excited to talk about this because it's a way to reach many more people than what I'm doing right now, which is largely one-on-one, because I am hearing from people daily and weekly who are losing their jobs and or just looking for a new job. So, I mean, the topic couldn't be any more timely. So, it's one of these times where looking for a job always does suck, Arun. I mean, it is hard, but it's unfortunately harder now for a couple of reasons. And I say that not to depress the audience, but to just let them know if they're having challenges, it's kind of expected. And most importantly, it's not about them. They may be doing a lot of things really right and still not having success, but they need to remain confident in themselves and their ability and their strategy, because there's a couple of factors working against them. One is, I really believe, and the data shows it, that we've really been in a white collar recession for at least 6 months or longer. There are just not that much white collar hiring occurring. And when you peel away the layer on all the jobs reports that come out, you find a lot of hiring in healthcare, government and services, but not a lot in IT and marketing and finance and some of these other disciplines that we all know very well. So we've got that challenge. And now we have the challenge of, I don't know how many it's going to be, Nicole, but lots of federal workers also being thrown into the job market. So you've just got a lot of competition out there for very few opportunities. And again, I don't mean to review that to depress people, but it's the reality that we're facing. And again, I think one of the things I tell people a lot is, don't take this journey alone.
Mm.
Build a support system. I talk about how do you build an army, and we can talk about that later when we get in. I think
Yep.
Arun mentioned in the first book when we get into that. But it's build that support system that you're going to need for the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months as you're going through this process, because it is hard. And for people who have never done it or who haven't done it in a long time, there's a lot to learn. And you're going to find you're going to get at bats. You're not going to get a hit every time. It's a little like baseball in that respect. You can get to the plate, but you're not always going to get a hit. So,
And Bill, have you seen a difference in approach from those people in the government who have been laid off versus, the Aruns and Nicoles of the world who have been in kind of big enterprise tech? Or is their approach different? Are their questions different? Is their panic level different?
I think, honestly, Nicole, I think right now they're more at the panic level than they are at their questions being different or their approach different. I mean, I think many are just shell shocked. And maybe the question, Nicole, that stands out is, so where do I start?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because where you two probably have some idea of what you would do if you had to look for a job, these folks are at ground zero with, how do I put together a resume? They've probably spent very little time on LinkedIn and think, oh, if I go to LinkedIn and find a job that's posted, I just use the easy apply button and I should hear from somebody.
Mm.
Where they're coming,
That's a slippery and very poorly ended slope.
well, what they did years ago, probably, it may not have been LinkedIn. Maybe it was, but it may not have been LinkedIn. But that's probably what a lot of them did. They went, if you guys think back, I mean, we're old enough to remember the beginning of Career Builder, the beginning of Monster.
Monster. That's right.
My goodness.
Monster's still around?
Yeah, it's still around. It's
Oh.
still around. The ladders, the beginning of the ladders. And back then it was very much go to a job board and apply. There was background noise around, networking is really important. And that's been true forever, but people didn't think as much about that as they did. Wow, there's these great electronic tools. So the approach in this era is going to be a little bit different, but these folks are starting from ground zero. I mean, they really are, because they haven't done it in a long time.
Yeah. One of the stories that when we had our prep call, Bill, you shared with me was, and I think it's important to call out that while there are the big names, the LinkedIns, the ladders, the formerly known as monsters, there's a lot of scam out there. There is a lot of let me review your resume or let me coach you or, let me be your career navigator human. Not all of those are real. And we have seen a bunch of folks fall into the trap to the tune of quite a bit of money, as you've experienced with some of your clients,
Yeah.
that, is just adding to the complexity.
Yeah, I think I shared this story where I was working with one woman, Nicole, and I always ask folks, send me a resume, let me take a look at it, because there's four things that I'm looking for, and we can talk about that, Arun, as well. But four things that I'm looking for very quickly when I pick up a resume, and as I talk about, a recruiter's not going to spend a lot of time on it. I mean, we're talking seconds. So she sent me a resume, and I do my redlining exercise on it, and we get back on the phone and I share this with her. And then we get back on the phone and literally, Nicole, she's despondent because there's so much red on this resume that she says to me, Bill, I spent $1,000 to have this done. And
Yeah.
you've just
The writing
the
and the
writing,
layout, all of it. Okay.
all of it. And you've just, gone through
Yeah.
like an attorney and redlined the document. And so one of the I don't know if it's a scam, Nicole. I'd like to think people are well intentioned, but you've got people who are now resume coaches, resume writers, and I don't want to pan all of them. I
Yeah.
mean,
No, there are some great ones out there.
I'm sure there are some very good ones out there, but the advice this woman received was, "Well, take out." she had put in a bunch of quantifiable, measurable accomplishments, and the advice from the resume writer was to take them out, which
That seems counterintuitive to everything I've ever learned about
Nicole,
this.
I was dumbfounded.
Yeah.
And as my note under every accomplishment is, everything she had was, is there a way to quantify this? Ask yourself the question, why does this matter? And that's why I say she was despondent, because she said, Bill, I took all of this out of my original draft. So when you ask your question about where they're starting, there's a lot out there that may not be the best advice. There's a lot of people out there willing to offer advice for a fee. And the key is just finding the resource that will give you a good and true and accurate picture of what the reader on the other end of that document or that process, what they're looking for and how they think. And
Mhm.
again, if you haven't done that, this is where a podcast like this that costs somebody nothing to get a lot of great advice is so valuable. So I take my hat off to both of you for doing this, because based on what I see, and even with real experienced people desperately need this kind of advice and this kind of help in this marketplace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that you said that. Thank you, because I think that was
You're
the
welcome.
idea that we had, because, you know, we are people who, while we have been in the job market for a long time at a very high level, I've never had to look for a job before. That is not something that I've ever had to do. I mean, not since college anyway, when I didn't have a resume anyway. Right. So the idea that surely we can help people at this moment get through it. You
Yeah.
said something in your book, which I debated whether or not I was going to bring up, because it's a hard piece of data to grapple with, and it was that recruiters have 6 to 8 seconds when they look at your resume. Like 6 to
Yeah.
8 seconds is 3 blinks, right? And so with that piece of data coupled with the thing that you said around, I look for 4 things, help
Yes.
us understand why we are spending so much time and so much effort, and where we go wrong on the resume stuff if you've got a total of 7 seconds and 4 things that Bill's looking for.
Okay. So, yeah, I'll be really clear about this, because this is how many recruiters read a resume. It's how their eyes flow down the document, and clearly what they're looking for. So the first thing is, what are you? And what people do at the top of their resume often is they'll have like some kind of professional summary. And Nicole, you'd be amazed at how many times I will read that and I'll say to myself, I don't know what this person is. I don't know if I'm talking to a tech executive. I don't know if I'm talking to a finance person. All I know is they've got great interpersonal skills. They love to collaborate. They're great in teams. They've achieved amazing results, and every other adjective you can think of. So what I'm looking for, and it probably sounds very unexciting, but you need to understand where you are in the process at this point. I did this morning, I'm a 25-year sales and, sales executive in the B2B and B2C space. I've worked with AT&T. I've worked at AT&T. I've worked at Charter. I've led teams of over 800 and generated revenue annually over $1 billion. And I forget, and there was a couple other, but the point, it was a hook.
Mm,
Because if somebody reads that, not only are they going to know what that person is, if they've sent it to the right person, that statement alone is going to grab the right person's attention. So
mhm,
as counter as it may sound, and I don't want to sound mean spirited, I don't care at that juncture if you're a collaborator, a team player, good interpersonal skills, that you got an A+ in writing class. I mean, all that stuff matters, but not right at that moment. What I'm
mhm,
looking for at that moment is the technical, functional expertise that tells me, is this person right for this job?
mhm,
So that's kind of point one. The second thing I'm looking for is, where they work. Because a lot of times when I'm filling a job, maybe it's a job where the focus is B2B, maybe the focus is B2C, maybe it's nonprofit, maybe it's for profit, maybe it's domestic, maybe it's international. A lot of people make the mistake is they'll put the name of a company, but they don't tell the reader anything about the company. They make a bad assumption that everybody's going to know. And I don't care if it's Google or if it's Joe's Rag Shop. You've got to put some kind of description there to make sure that that reader has the same understanding as you do, so they don't make a lot of bad assumptions about either one of those organizations. It's just no more than 2 sentences, but it's in italics. So again, think about my eyes. What are you? Boom. Your really clear statement. Where have you worked? I can quickly scroll down. I can see those companies in a quick description. Third, and I'm going to be quite literal about this, I want to see something that says responsible for. I'm looking for a mini statement of your job description of what your remit has been in that role. I lead a sales team of 800, responsible for this amount of revenue, coordinating international and domestic sales activities, or whatever it is. And it's a sentence or two, but it clearly tells me if I have a job to fill on the right here and I'm looking at this and I'm seeing, okay, he was responsible for, that's a really good fit. And now I'm going to keep reading. And then the last thing, again, very literal, accomplishments include bullet, bullet, bullet. A lot of times what people do, Nicole, is they kind of blend responsibilities and accomplishments. So it takes me as the reader a little longer to tease those out. And what I'm saying is, don't make me take the time to tease those out, because I might not. I just might not do it. Or if I do it, maybe I miss something that I shouldn't have missed. So when I'm working with folks on their resume, I say I want to see responsible for and accomplishments include, or some other words that capture the same
Yeah.
point. But that is how a recruiter looks at a resume, and when it's written in that way, it's really quick for my eyes to scroll down and see whether or not this is a fit with something I'm trying to fill.
It's so interesting. I led an innovation program for years. And one of the things we would say when we were building solutions were customers don't want to do two things: don't make me wait and don't make me think. And yet, when we come as our own CEO of our own careers, which is what we are doing,
Yeah, it's a good way
the
to put it.
resume becomes the articulation of every friggin' thing we have done in our whole lives that has mattered to anybody, including our parents. And so we do the opposite of what we want in our own life, which is don't make me wait and don't make me think. And instead, we're like, I'd love to tell you about this very discrete moment that happened when I handled it really beautifully and everybody loved me afterwards and I won an award for it. Right. And so there is this, I think, real big gap between what we need to deliver on a resume and how we want the resume to make people feel.
Yeah, people will have two things they'll do. They'll have a section up front, and this drives me nuts. They'll have their name, and then they'll have a thing like called maybe selected accomplishments, and there'll be like 7 or 8 bullets of stuff. The problem with that, there's no context. I don't know if that happened 10 minutes ago or if it happened 10 years ago. You put that in the body of your resume where it belongs. Now, and then the other thing they do, and I'll explain why they do it. They'll also have a section skills, and it'll be a section of just
Word salad.
word salad. Now, here's why they're doing it. People have been trained that when you apply for a job, and the thinking is you're applying online, which we should talk about, Arun, you need all those keywords so your resume gets discovered.
Yeah.
And there may be some truth to that. I would rather see those keywords baked into the format I've described, because as I said, a long list of accomplishments with no context forces me to do more work. And a long list of words, unless it's something so unique and specialized that then it might make sense. But even that could be at the bottom or baked into what you've accomplished. But um, it's not what I, as a recruiter, want to see. I'm really looking for those four things, and I'd rather have a lot of that stuff baked into, utilize this program or utilize this technology to reduce customer churn by X%. Wow, he or she's used this program, and they reduce customer churn. And I'm looking for a customer success executive. Wow, this is a really good fit for what I'm looking for. So
Mhm.
there's context in around those accomplishments. I can see it wasn't done 30 years ago. Maybe it was done last year, because 30 years ago, eh, I'm not sure how much that's going to matter. It matters to our parents,
Right.
but
Right. It matters for your wall of fame at your
yeah,
parents' house. It doesn't matter as much, but it brings up a good point. You have an entire chapter about if you're over 50. Now,
yeah,
I'm not gonna go onto a public broadcast and tell everybody my age. I can tell you that I'm not there, but I'm headed, as we all are.
yeah,
And so now you're in this place. I faced this when I just redid my resume. I don't know, Arun, if you had the same thing. When I first wrote down my accomplishments, it was 3 pages. And it was like, is this a resume or the beginning of a book? Right. So where do you land on the length of this? Or, we could just do it in 2 font.
yeah. People will always ask if they've got to get their resume down to 2 pages. And, in this digital era, I'm not sure, that the 2 page paradigm still matters. Part of what I'm looking for, whether it's an executive or is their ability to communicate clearly and concisely. And my first measure of that is what I see on their resume. I've had people hand me 10-page resumes who are applying for executive jobs, and I almost just miss them out of hand,
Hmm.
because it tells me this person really can't capture who they are and what they've done in a clear and concise way. Because let's face it, I mean, both of you know this. That's what effective executives do really well. They don't
Yep.
need 10 minutes to talk about who they are and what they've done. I mean, they have a way of just capturing that clearly and concisely. So in a minute, you get it. The other point I would say, if something's, let's say you've got a bunch of jobs and you get to that point where they're older than 20 years. And again, I did this morning with somebody. We just took all of those, other professional experience, and we put them in a category. We put them in that category. And we put, the company and the title and the dates, but we didn't get into all the responsible for and accomplishments include, because it's starting to get old, and we wanted to use the space up front with the current jobs to really drill down on responsibilities and accomplishments, because it's going to matter more. Somebody might inquire about, Bill, 30 years ago, you worked at Hewlett Packard. What was that like when Bill and Dave were around? It makes for interesting conversation,
Right.
but they're not going to be as keen on what I accomplished in those jobs as much as they are what I've done most recently. So, I don't get hung up, if it's a little longer, and people have drilled down on all that stuff, because oftentimes I'll just stop with the most recent stuff that really matters. But I would think most people could get it down to 3 pages if they really focus on what matters most.
Yeah. So, Bill, we've talked a lot about when you get information, you get resumes, you get recommendations of people. How do you find people? When one of your clients comes to you and says,
Mm,
Bill, I am really looking for a kick-ass sales executive in the telecom space, since it sounds like maybe you have one at the ready from this morning. How do you find them?
this is another two-beer discussion,
Had I known.
because and I'm having it right now with a couple people, actually. I mean, the best resource of all that's out there is LinkedIn. And I would tell you, between LinkedIn, maybe your own database, maybe Zoom Info, in the executive search world, and it's even true for other professional roles, finding people is no longer hard. It's all there. You can find anybody you want to find. The challenge is being able to tell, is having a message that's exciting and compelling to generate, interest from somebody. but it's not hard to find people. And what I tell job seekers is your job is to get found. And that's where, your profile on, you want to have that resume the way I described it. Well, your profile on LinkedIn ought to resemble that.
Mhm.
And you ought to have something in your about section that tells people, that's where you can talk more about what makes you special in addition to maybe your great functional or technical skills. But there's something about the way you work with people, the way you build teams. That's where you can embellish that kind of information. But you need to have a profile that resembles your resume. I think a lot of, when recruiters search LinkedIn, they often, will start with a couple of filters and then they'll drill down into maybe others. But the first two are going to be title and geography. So under your pretty picture on LinkedIn, don't have what I see a lot of times, which is, again, word salad.
Hmm.
And you look at it and like, so is this a product person or is this a marketing person? Is this a salesperson? I mean, you want to be really clear about, you're a VP of sales, you're a general manager of operations. I mean, be really clear about what you are, not only on your resume, but on your LinkedIn profile. Make it easy for recruiters to find you. And, because I have to be careful here, but the way LinkedIn mostly gets used is by job seekers and recruiters.
Mhm.
The average person, and I know this just from doing some book marketing and digging into LinkedIn and looking at thousands of profiles and realizing I never see these people on LinkedIn. The job seeker and the recruiter are and the people selling and people doing self-promotion. The majority of people who have their heads down are working hard, trying to accomplish something. They spend almost no time on LinkedIn.
Do you think that's a dangerous strategy?
To use? No, to you, to
No,
what?
I mean, I think one of the things I didn't use LinkedIn like as effectively as I could have. I it's not that I regret that now, but I am keenly aware of it now in a way in which I wasn't before. But I'll give you a really good example. I'm hosting an event tomorrow, and anybody, it's in DC, and anybody that wants to come to it who has been laid off from the federal government or feels like they're about to be laid off doesn't have to pay. And so I was tagging a bunch of my friends who are in the federal government and they weren't showing up on LinkedIn. And so I was texting them saying like, "Hey, where are you on LinkedIn?" Well, I found them eventually. A couple of them sent me a direct link, but these are not well-rounded LinkedIn profiles. And, they have a headshot, but not a header. They don't have an about me. That, it just has a bunch of logos that don't even say what they did. And I said to them, ladies, this was a group of women who I'm hosting. You have to do better than this. You may not want to spend a lot of time. Arun and I call it very lovingly the digital sewer. Because to your point, there's two groups of people that hang out there, and then a third group of people that just love to be like, hey, guess what? Like, I got up this morning. It's like, congratulations. But it is a real necessary tool. It just is. And if we think about a resume being part of your tool belt when you're in these moments, LinkedIn is absolutely one of them too. So
Yeah.
having one, despite how it may make you feel, is incredibly important, it seems.
Yeah, Nicole, I would say don't make the mistake that a lot of people do, and that is starting with LinkedIn. I would start with building your resume profile in the
Mm.
way I described. Just because LinkedIn, will force you maybe to do things a little bit differently, force you to think a little bit differently. Free yourself from that structure, build that resume first, and then transport that information into LinkedIn. But again, maybe going back to your first question, what's different? Yeah, these folks need to pay attention to LinkedIn and have a well-written profile. I think the other challenge that they have, and I think it's different than maybe the environment the three of us have been in. We are used to a very short time horizon to get things done. I mean, I don't know about the three of you, but and this goes back to AOL days, but we talked about 90-day plans. We all did 90-day plans. And the idea was what the heck are you going to accomplish 90 days? Some of these folks are used to working on programs that have
10 years.
10-year kind of horizons.
Mm.
So they're going to have to think about maybe how do I chunk that up? So what was it that we, you got this long time horizon objective they're trying to accomplish. What did we accomplish at different times that they can put some some metrics around to show, that they understand, not only to show accomplishment, but to show they understand
Mm-hmm.
how their reader thinks. Um, it can't be a resume, and here's the trap they could run into. It can't be a document of activity. Okay. I did this, I did that. It's gotta be a document. Remember, accomplishments include bullet, bullet, bullet. And there's gotta be accomplishments that are and I realize not every accomplishment is measurable. Don't misunderstand me, but get as close to why did it matter as possible. So breaking some of those 10, this was a 10-year project. Well, break it down into some accomplishments that add to that 10-year, but don't just word salad activity kind of stuff, because it's going to be hard for people to resume. The other thing I would say, titles matter. I'll, look at your title relative to, what it might be, you know, outside the government. Don't tell me you were a GS-15.
Someone had to explain that to me the other day. I'm from DC. I didn't know what GS-15 meant.
You were an operations executive, right?
Right. Yeah.
If you were doing communications, you were a communications executive or a communications manager. I mean, it's not being deceitful. You're describing what you were doing in a way the reader, which is my big, we're going to talk about it later, but one of those three things, think about your reader.
Mm-hmm.
Don't write this stuff for yourself, write it for your reader. And your reader isn't going to get a GS-16, isn't going to get the federal language. But if you put operations executive or operations manager, or, they have, what is it? The Office of Personnel Management,
Mm-hmm.
um, maybe you were an HR manager, so the reader will understand, be able to translate what you were doing there and what you can do outside of there.
So, Bill, thank you.
Yes.
These are some amazing, amazing tips and feedback from you. I just want to take a step into a different paradigm here. And we talked a little bit about this, and you mentioned in past rolling 6 months window over last fiscal year, there's some statistic around 75,000 white collar jobs being created versus 600,000 something white collar jobs. These are some staggering numbers. I mean, there's like a few zeros missing here. So, I think one thing that comes to my mind when I heard this is networking. How do I find those jobs as a job seeker? And in your book, how to find a job without looking, you talk about building that sustainable relationships versus just network. Could you talk a little bit about what the trap that people fall into versus how should one even think about this from in this current economic reality?
Yeah. I mean, the way networking, I think, is vastly misunderstood. It's scary as heck for people because of the way they think about it. And it's thought of as more of something I have to do now, as opposed to something that is just part of my professional operating system. So the whole idea, and I find as I said, I think before we started the call, I find myself talking with folks more and more and saying to them, you need to build an army. Arun, I'll use you as an example. Arun needs to build an army of people that care about him, that know him well, that they would drop what they're doing to help him if he needed assistance, and he vice versa. And you need to think about former bosses, former colleagues. And I'm not just talking about former bosses and former colleagues from 2 or 3 years ago. You can go back 20 years, 30 years. And again, I realize those can be uncomfortable connections to try to make if you haven't been in touch with somebody. But I can tell you from some experiments we've done, many times people are thrilled to hear from you. And the way you reach out to people, Arun, and there's so much to cover here. There's just so much to cover. Because the other thing, Nicole, I want to go back to is how do you apply for these jobs? Because there's something there as well, is not to ask for a job, but you're asking for help. And you're doing it in a way that makes it easy for people to help. Because in my experience, my personal belief in life is that most people want to be helpful. You just sometimes got to make it a little bit easier. And job seekers have a habit of making an exchange or trying to rekindle a relationship that's gone cold by putting people on the spot by saying, hey, I'm looking for a director of engineering job. Is there anything available at your company? That is not where you start. But you start with, an honest statement about the fact that, hey, you're looking to make a change and you've got some questions and would love to get your advice. For example, what do you see happening in the tech marketplace? What are you finding tech hiring managers looking for now in a tech background? I'd love to get you. I'd love for you to take a look at my resume and give me any advice you might have on how I can improve it, and so on. I mean, there may be, hey, this just happened in our industry. What effect do you think it's going to have on technology going forward? The idea here is not so much to get a job. The idea here is to rekindle a relationship and to start that process so you can eventually get around to asking. So initially you're doing some telling, and you eventually get around to having enough of a connection that you can say, hey, if you hear of something or if you're aware of something at your company, hey, let me know. But to hit somebody cold with that after not talking with them for a long time, it puts people on the spot, and it makes it no one wants to make you feel worse. So the idea, you kind of got to warm it up a little bit. And I realize that this is a hair on fire kind of moment, and taking the time to kind of warm it up seems a little scary. But if you just start sending out canned emails to everybody saying, hey, I'm looking for a job, can you help me? What do you have available? You're not going to get the kind of response you need, because what you're going to do once you get that initial call, so you're emailing people, and once you get that initial call, you're going to close it out with several questions that we always talk about, which is, do you know anybody else who might have a handle on what's going on in the industry, might have some good advice on how to perform a job search nowadays? So you're trying to get a referral to, do you know any recruiters you know and trust that you could recommend me to? Is it okay if I reach out in a couple months and just give you an update on how I'm doing and what I've learned, maybe, and maybe pass it along? And fourth, is there anything I can help you with right now? In my last job, we did a lot with AI, or we did a lot with, a new ERP finance package. I'd be happy to tell you all about how that works if that would be of interest. So you're trying to back into a relationship building process, as opposed to, it's not going to an event. People think of networking as, I got to go to an event and I'm an introvert and I got to talk to people that I don't know. And, there's ways to do that. We talk about that in the book too, but networking is much more about relationships. And I talk about sitting down with a Excel spreadsheet, a Google sheet, a yellow tablet, whatever you use in your beverage of choice, and start thinking about, who do I know? Who do I know? Boss, former bosses, former colleagues, vendors, suppliers, and the other onion that I often direct people to is their alumni network, because alumni can be a great resource, but they rarely get used. And if you reach out to them in the right way, many are very, very willing to give you some time and answer some questions, and, hopefully maybe start building a relationship with that person. But they get rarely used. And it doesn't matter if you're out of school 1 year or you're out of school 20 years. If you can reach back and, hey, like you, I'm a Geneseo White Knight, and would love to, would really appreciate your support, as I've got some questions about the job search that I think you might be able to help with.
I think, Bill, too, you bring in something so underutilized, and it's not appropriate for everybody, and it's not appropriate for every situation. But something I used to talk about with people on my team all the time when you're trying to build relationships is bring a gift. That gift
Oh,
can be anything. It can be an insight. It can be an article. It can be, hey, I wrote some thought leadership on this topic. Steal away. Are in your job because you have a unique set of skills that you have honed and something that you're passionate about, bring that to them. And
yeah.
not in a like cheesy weird way. Just be like, if this is helpful to you, they might totally ignore it and that's fine too. But I think the other thing that it does for you is it also helps you remember, I actually am talented. I do have a gift to give. And I'm not
Yeah.
just standing
Good
there with my
point.
hand out. To me, there's a bit of a give get there that
Yeah.
happens when you show up to those conversations or those asks. And in fact, I have someone actually who's like sitting in my inbox who I know wants to help, but I don't want to just go to that call. I know that I have something interesting for that human in their job. I don't actually care if there's a job there. I know I can help them with something that they're struggling with, but I'm going to take the time to make sure that I really narrow that offering. But I think that that's such a powerful and really underutilized way. And think about, my kids would tell you that we have a family rule: you never show up to someone's house without something. It can be a candle, it can be taking in their mail, like, but do not show up empty handed. Same thing applies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There, Arun,
The
back to
other
your,
thing that I
go
the other thing that I want to add, data engineering mind here. So I always, coach people on having a target. Who are the 30 people in your inner circle
ahead.
and then 10 people in your outer circle that you
Yeah.
want to reach out to in next 60 days? You mentioned about sitting down with a spreadsheet and a marker, and just have that, that actually gives you an accountability matrix to say, here are the people I spoke to. I've redlined them, these people. I've greenlined these people, or I have, yellow lined these people. And then you have a color coding of who to go after.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's one thing
Yeah.
that I would suggest. And the other thing, which this is super important, especially in in this journey, is have a check-in at the end of the night, checking in like what went right,
Hmm.
what went wrong,
Yeah.
what did you learn, who and what are you grateful for the day, because gratitude kind of builds that resilience in all of
Mhm.
us. And what are your plans? Are your plans like what are you changing, right? What are you adding? What are you taking off, right? Are you
Yeah.
still on your plan? So that is super important, that personal accountability, that data driven way of thinking, and then also having a reflection at the end of the day. Okay, here's what I've done, because it's very easy to burn all the time
Mhm.
in this process. So that's another angle that I have in this conversation. I'm sorry I
No,
interrupt
I
you,
would
Bill.
agree. I would agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, you have to, it kind of goes back to if you can't keep doing the same thing over and over if you're not getting results. And it's important to continually stop and look at what you're doing and asking yourself those questions. What's work? What do I need to start, stop, and continue doing to potentially get a better result? The other thing I was going to say about networking, Arun, one of the mistakes people make, and I see this over and over and over, is that they reach out once,
Mhm.
they never follow up. And the whole idea, again, they're thinking networking, they're thinking transaction, as opposed to, it's about building a relationship. In the book I talk about my vital few, and you're staying in touch with people and giving them updates and giving them more opportunities to say, I thought of this, or there's somebody else I could refer you to. It's there. And if you don't hear back from somebody, it's persisting. You may have to reach out to somebody 2 or 3 times to get that initial phone call. It's not because they don't like you. They're just busy. And you just have to persist. And at some point, yeah, maybe you redline them, Arun, and you take them off your initial list because they're not getting back to you. But I tell you, the mistake I see people make is they don't reach out a second or third or fourth time. They reach out once. And, I now some of the people I coach, I get emails from them just saying, hey, how you doing? Things are going really well here, and just touching base. And I write back and say, great to hear. Keep me posted. And it's just, it doesn't take any time at all.
Yeah. Speaking of that, reaching out, I have a very curious question. So you mentioned, I think in one of your books, in one of your talks, that only 30% of jobs are advertised. So now we're talking about 30% of that 74,000 jobs. So how should one think about cold call? Is cold calling even, even recommended in this world?
It's a strategy. I think it's a strategy with a very low return.
Mm.
Uh, yeah, it's not something I would spend a lot of time on. I mean, there's two places where you're going to hear about jobs, right? The jobs that are posted, and what I tell people is don't apply for the job online. And the reason you're writing the resume you are is because you're going to figure out a good use of LinkedIn is to figure out who the boss is, and then you're going to email that boss directly with a 2-sentence email, on that 30-year sales executive, B2B, that it's that statement, because that's what will catch their attention. And the second line is simply very interested in this role. I look forward to speaking. And then here's the tip. You copy and paste and embed that resume right in that email. You don't make them click on anything. You don't make them open anything, because people aren't necessarily reading, Arun, they're scanning. And if that initial one sentence is packed with stuff that really is aligned with what they're looking for, chances are somebody is going to reach out to you. I mean, the objective, guys, here has changed from 20 or 30 years ago, when the objective was to apply for a job, you want to get a call. That's no longer the objective. The objective now is simply to be seen. So you've got to do everything you can, whether it's a great LinkedIn profile that mirrors your resume, whether you're applying for jobs directly going to a hiring manager. And for an executive, that's really easy to figure out. And for other jobs, it may take a little more effort to figure out, but you can figure it out. And part of what I do in the book is here's some strategies for figuring out their work email so you can go direct. But then the other way, Arun, is just through it's networking. I don't even call it networking. It's just through your relationships that you're building. That eventually somebody's going to say something, somebody's going to connect the dots. You're going to hear about something. You're going to get referred. You're going to get recommended. You're going to get pushed in some direction that leads to an opportunity. And I tell folks, spend Monday, exhaust what you see online, make those apply for those jobs in the way I described. The rest of the week, it's who can I reach out to? Who can I talk to? It's about relationships. And don't, as I've seen a lot of people, become a slave to LinkedIn. I mean, I've talked to many job seekers who will say, oh, I spend 8 hours a day on LinkedIn and I'm so frustrated. I can't find anything. And it's because, frankly, there's not that much there. I mean, there's just not that much there. You've got to leverage the relationship side of this process more than anything.
Yeah. So I have one last question on this. Rejections are part of this process,
Yeah.
and nowadays, when I talk to a lot of people, that's one thing that people seems to be struggling with. In fact, one of my past colleagues told me that in my past experience of going through this, I had 5 jobs that I applied for, and even the job one, I got an offer. So nowadays I've done 5 interviews, 5 jobs, and I don't have a job. So how should one think about rejections, and what can one take from rejection? I'm sure that everybody has different formulas, but from your perspective, what can one take from rejections? How do they kind of bring this rejection process into filtration and application and finding jobs?
Yeah. Well, the old saying in sales, every rejection gets you closer to a sale. And, people will tell you that over and over. I don't know if it makes you feel any better. I think, to your point earlier, Arun, I think that's part of your daily reflection, right? And having to ask yourself, what could you have done differently that might have made a difference? Unfortunately, it's not a process where you're going to get honest feedback. I mean, I know the line. You guys might know the line too. When someone asks, why didn't this work out for me? Well, it just wasn't the right fit. I mean, how many times have you heard that? How many times have you said that? But that's about all you're going to get, Arun, from the experience. But I think all you can do is just really self-reflect and listen. If you're getting interviews, you're really close. And that's a really good thing. So the other thing is to, even though you may not be crossing the plate, celebrate the fact that you're getting these opportunities, learn what you can. So the next one is hopefully has a better outcome.
Yeah. And one of the tips that I always coach people on is when you get a rejection, oftentimes people just shut down, like, oh, they rejected me. So I'm like, I'm not even going to talk to them.
Uh,
My coaching is send them a note. Hey, thank
yes,
you. This is
yeah,
great.
yeah.
Help me understand. Like, I'm really curious, what were the gaps, or what did you find? Is there something that constructively that you can give me from this experience?
Uh,
And and you'll be surprised that you get a response back from the person on two or three things, or maybe one thing, like there was a skill gap or whatever that is, and then incorporate that into your daily reflection at the end of the day. Like, okay, this is something that I've learned from this rejection. Okay, how do I need to think about this?
yeah, I mean, I think if you can get that kind of feedback, you're fortunate. In my experience, most companies are reluctant to provide that. But I think sending a follow-up note, and I talk about this, is really, and I have a story where somebody actually sent a follow-up note saying, hey, thank you very much. Enjoyed the experience. Really impressed with the people, really impressed with the company. Would love to continue the conversation in the future if there's an opportunity. It turns out the person they offered the job to, they got right down to almost start date, backed out. They called her. And I'm convinced it was because she followed up with that kind of a note. It wasn't sour grapes. It wasn't even so much around giving me feedback as much as it was just letting them know how impressed she was and how much she would like to work for their organization. And lo and behold, it worked out. Now it's not going to work out like that all the time, but I would highly advise sending a note like that. And if the person gives you the indication, stay in touch with them every 3 months. I mean, literally, that is how I got one of my jobs very early in my career. I was rejected, and I stayed in touch with the hiring manager for like 3 years. I mean, I can be a pain in the ass, I guess, if is
Yeah.
the other way to look at it. But I stayed in touch for 3 years, and she called. Back then,
Yeah. And what I'm noticing is that with the millennial generation and then the streaming generation, there is a change in how people communicate and what people communicate. People feel that, okay, if I've rejected somebody, I have to give them one or two important insights. And that's kind of what I'm observing, at least in the younger companies, the tech, where people are very thoughtful and transparent. I mean, of course, they will not tell you the whole big picture, laundry, dirty laundry, right? But they'll tell you one or two things. Hey, here's one thing that I observed.
if you can get it, that's great.
That is gold. That is
Yeah.
gold, right? When you hear something like that, that is gold. And then the mindset that I believe one needs to approach this with is, how do I get better? How do I shave that extra level of efficiency and then
Mhm.
elevate myself, right? So that's kind of
Yep.
the rejection mindset that I, when I talk to people, I'm like, okay,
It
this
makes
is
a lot of
something.
sense. Makes a lot of sense. Yep.
So, Bill, speaking of the network effect and new relationships, we are so grateful to have you in ours. And
No,
hopefully,
me too.
our audience, I know they've learned something. I've learned something on this. This has been an incredible conversation. And again, what's funny as we were talking about how often we've referenced the book, I have referenced the book. But if you are an auditory or a visual learner like I am, this is just so much more powerful than just hearing it and just reading it with my highlighter on the page. So, I'm
Yeah.
incredibly grateful that you answered an email from a stranger. I know that everybody has gotten something out of this. And I think you also have some tips on your website, and it was something in the book about the networking template. We're going to link any of those tools that you'd like to share with us as
Sure.
well.
Sure.
We always ask everybody at the end of our podcast, give us 3 things, 3 takeaways, 3 tips. You tell us what they are, but we're really anxious to hear your top 3.
Yeah, I mean, I would say my first one is remember that no matter how this process goes, you're okay and you will find a job, even though it's going to be harder and you're going to have to probably persist at it longer than maybe you have in the past. It's going to work out. And the frustration you're feeling is natural, but you've got to, again, remember the circumstances. It's a tough market. It's getting even tougher. It's not about you. You're okay. And just believe in your heart that you're okay. Do the self-reflection, but don't lose sight of all you've accomplished, all you bring to an employer, uh, and just continue to believe that you're going to be okay. I think the second thing, it goes back to our comment, Nicole, about resumes. Really, and because it's such an important communication tool, really think about the reader. Really think about the reader. Think about those four things that recruiters who are your readers or hiring managers are looking at very quickly to figure out if the person they're talking to is actually the right person. So often people write these documents maybe for their parents, or they look at it as, here's where I'm going to capture everything about myself that I'd like to tell people. And it's a time when they need to think like an executive and learn how to be really clear and concise with their accomplishments. I think the third thing, I'm going to make more of an offer for people. If people see this and they like to talk, I'm willing to, maybe in exchange for buying the book and writing a great review on Amazon, I'm happy to get on the phone, talk about your strategy, look at your resume, answer questions, and be a resource for people. And if the line gets long, it may take me a little longer to get back to people, but kind of the networking effect.
Yeah.
My big ask is, I'd like more people to see the book. I'd like to get more reviews on the book, which is just how you play the digital publishing game. But in return, I mean, I can be a resource for people and, do this live and in person and really help people if they're feeling stuck. So
That is incredibly generous, Bill. Thank you so much for that. And I know I'm a little worried about how many people are about to take you up on this, but hey, it could be a good problem to have. We'll have
yeah,
to
we'll
see.
see. We'll
We'll have
see.
to see. If you call me, next week and say, "Whoops," well, we can always edit that part out. But Bill, this has been amazing as always. Arun, great to be with you. We actually launched technically this week, and the feedback has been absolutely overwhelming. It seems like Arun and I are not the only people that are facing these existential questions and needed a voice and needed a face to put with it. So very grateful to both of you. Always grateful to our listeners. Please subscribe, hit the follow, do all the things, because there's an algorithm just like LinkedIn. So we're grateful for your support, Bill, and look forward to
You're
the next
welcome.
one.
All righty. We'll see you again.
Thank you, Bill.
All right.
And
Bye,
thank you,
guys.
Nicole.